Jeremy. Today's day 179 of reading. Today we're reading Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We're on page 298. Let's get started. I turned in their direction. Parvati and Lavender were looking scandalized. You are disturbing the clairvoyant vibrations. She approached their tables and peered into their crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew what was coming. There's something here, Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face to the ball, so that it was reflected twice in her huge glasses. Something's moving, but what is it? Harry was prepared to bet everything he owned, including his fireball, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was. And sure enough, my dear, Professor Trelawney breathed, gazing up at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before, my dear, stalking toward you, growing ever closer. Oh, for goodness sake, said Hermione loudly, not that ridiculous grim again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes to Hermione's face. Parvati whispered something to Lavender, and they both glared at Hermione too. Professor Trelawney stood up, surveying Hermione with unmistakable anger. I am sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has been apparent that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane. There was a moment's silence. Then, fine, said Hermione suddenly, getting up and cramming unfogging the future back into her bag. Fine, she repeated, swinging the bag over her shoulder and almost knocking Ron off his chair. I give up. I'm leaving. And to the whole class's amazement, Hermione strode over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, and climbed down the ladder out of sight. It took a few minutes for the class to settle down again. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten all about the Grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily as she tugged her gauzy shawl more closely to her. Ooh, said Lavender Trelawney, making everyone start. Ooh, Professor Trelawney, I just remembered. You saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever. You said it ages ago, Professor. Professor Trelawney gave her a dewy smile. Yes, my dear, I did indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might have mistaken the signs. The inner eye can be a burden, you know. Lavender and Parvati looked deeply impressed and moved over so that Professor Trelawney could join their table instead. Some day Hermione's having, Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. Yeah. Harry glanced into the crystal ball, but saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the Grim again? Would he? The last thing he needed was another near-fatal accident, with the Quidditch final drawing even nearer. The Easter holidays were not exactly relaxing. The third years had never had so much homework. Nevada Longbottom seemed close to a nervous collapse, and he wasn't the only one. How's this a holiday? Seamus Finnegan roared at the common room one afternoon. The exams are ages away. What are they playing at? But nobody had as much as to do as Hermione. Even without divination, she was taking more subjects than anybody else. She was usually last to leave the common room at night, first to arrive at the library the next morning. She had shadows like lupins under her eyes and seemed consistently close to tears. Ron had taken over responsibility for Buckbeak's appeal. When he wasn't doing his work, he was poring over enormously thick volumes with names like The Handbook of Gryffindor Psychology and Foul or Foul, a study of hippogriff brutality. He was so absorbed, he even forgot to be horrible to Crookshanks. Harry, meanwhile, had to fit in his homework around Quidditch practice every day, not to mention endless discussions of tactics with Wood. The Gryffindor Slytherin match would take place on the first Saturday after the Easter holidays. After the Easter holidays, Slytherin was leading the tournament by exactly 200 points. This meant, as Wood consistently reminded his team, that they needed to win the match by more than that amount to win the cup. It also meant that the burden of winning fell largely on Harry, because capturing the snitch was worth 150 points. So you must catch it only if we're more than 50 points up, Wood told Harry constantly. Only if we're more than 50 points up, Harry, or we win the match but lose the cup. You've got that, haven't you? You must catch the snitch only if we're... I know, Oliver! Harry yelled. The whole of Gryffindor House was obsessed with the coming match. Gryffindor hadn't won the Quidditch Cup since the legendary Charlie Weasley, Ron's second oldest brother, had been Seeker. But Harry doubted whether any of them, even Wood, wanted to win as much as he did. The enmity between Harry and Malfoy was at its highest point ever. Malfoy was still smarting about the mud-throwing incident in Hogsmeade and was even more furious that Harry had somehow wormed his way out of punishment. Harry hadn't forgotten Malfoy's attempt to sabotage him in that match against Ravenclaw, but it was a matter of Buckbeak that made him most determined to beat Malfoy in front of the entire school. Never, in anyone's memory, had a match approached in such a highly charged atmosphere. By the time the holidays were over, tension between the two times and their houses was at a breaking point. A small number of scuffles broke out in the corridors, culminating in a nasty incident in which a Gryffindor 4th year and a Slytherin 6th year ended up in the hospital wings with leaks sprouting out of their ears. Harry was having a particularly bad time of it. He couldn't walk to class without Slytherins sticking out their legs and trying to trip him up. Crabbe and Goyle kept popping up wherever he went, and slouching away, looking disappointed when they saw him surrounded by people. Wood had given instructions that Harry should be accompanied everywhere he went, in case the Slytherins tried to put him out of action. The whole of Gryffindor House took up the challenge enthusiastically, so that it was impossible for Harry to get to classes on time because he was surrounded by a vast, chattering crowd. Harry was more concerned for his fireball's safety than his own. When he wasn't flying it, he locked it securely in his trunk and frequently dashed back up to the Gryffindor Tower at break times to check that it was there. All usual pursuits were abandoned in the Gryffindor common room the night before the match. Even Hermione had put down her books. I can't work. I can't concentrate, she said nervously. There was a great deal of noise. Fred and George Weasley were dealing with the pressure of being louder and more exuberant than ever. Oliver Wood was crouched over a model of a Quidditch field in the corner, prodding little figures across it with his wand and muttering to himself. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie were laughing at Fred and George's jokes. Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione, removed from the center of things, trying not to think about the next day, because every time he did, he had the horrible sensation that something very large was fighting to get out of his stomach. "We're going to be fine," Hermione told him, though she looked positively terrified. "You've got a fireball," said Ron. "Yeah," said Harry, his stomach writhing. It came as a relief when Wood suddenly stood up and yelled, "Team, bed!" Harry slept badly. First he dreamed that he had overslept, and that Wood was yelling, "Where were you? We had to use the vial instead." Then he dreamed that Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherin team arrived for the match riding dragons. He was flying at breakneck speed, trying to avoid a spurt of flame from Malfoy's steed's mouth. When he realized he had forgotten his fireball, he fell through the air and woke up with a start. It was a few seconds before Harry remembered that the match hadn't taken place yet, that he was safe in bed, and that the Slytherin team definitely wouldn't be allowed to play on dragons. He was feeling very thirsty. Quietly as he could, he got out of his four-poster and went to pour himself some water from the silver jug beneath the window. The grounds were still and